Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, I'm so happy you're here, and I hope you're doing awesomely well. We are rolling right into the holiday season at the time that this podcast airs. And so I thought it would be a good time to talk about relationships and our health. Staying mindful of the health of your relationships is, of course, important throughout the entire year. And tears in the fabric of relationships become more pronounced this time of year, which is around the holidays. Why are the holidays so challenging for relationships? Lots of reasons. First and foremost, in all the years that I've coached women, I always see a pattern where women are experiencing more stress at the end of the year, which means less self-care, which of course creates less resources for them to live their life with. And that really leads to more reactivity. And we're stressed this time of year for a myriad of reasons. Number one, it's the end of the year. So I think a lot of people are really intuitively in decompression mode. And yet we're going completely against the grain of decompression mode. We're actually ramping things up because we're trying to make everyone around us happy and create memorable experiences and buy the gifts and create the celebrations, which again, I can see really wearing on many, many women that I work with. The holidays are also an incubator of social settings. And what I mean by that is we have a lot more opportunity to attend parties and dinners and social gatherings, which, if you're introverted or you simply feel exhausted at the end of the year, that alone, those social settings can really feel taxing to you. And then, of course, family and friends. We have a lot more opportunity to spend time with family and friends, which is lovely and good. And a lot of the people we see around the holiday season are not necessarily seeing us often throughout the year. So they aren't necessarily experiencing our evolution and growth as a person. And so we get together with these people once a year or once every, few years. And we often feel like we're being treated like we're 16 years old or like we haven't changed since we graduated from college. I know this is a frustration that I bump up against a lot around the holidays. People don't realize necessarily how much I've changed. And so they're expecting me to be the same person that I used to be. And that for me personally creates a lot of stress. And then, of course, with all of these social settings, all of this opportunity to engage with family and friends, there's a lot of triggers. There tend to be a lot of conversations around hot topics like politics and religion and the economy. We get a lot of unsolicited advice around the holidays on how to parent, what to do with our careers, what life choices we should be making. There's a lot of food pushing around the holidays because there are many people in the world who express their love through food. And then, of course, there's a lot of traditions that we can feel obligated to participate in, even though they don't really feel like they have a connection to us. So we're engaging with traditions that sort of fall flat for us. So hopefully something in there resonates for you, because today I really do want to do a deeper dive on some truths about relationships that if you carry those around in your purse throughout the holidays, and even better yet, throughout the rest of the year, I think they're really going to help you to show up in your relationships in a way that makes you feel really good. Now, for me as a health professional, someone who's been in the women's wellness space for many, many years, I've always found it really frustrating that we separate relationship health from physical health, and we separate physical health from mental health. So we have all these pools of health that we have sort of created their own category for, right? So if you have relationship troubles, you go to a relationship expert. If you have a physical health malady, you go to a physician or you work with a personal trainer. If you have, depression or anxiety, you go to a mental health specialist. And I think all of that is well and good because, of course, there are people who specialize in these realms, and we can learn an awful lot from someone who has studied a specific aspect of health. And yet, we cannot ignore the fact that health integrates. It doesn't know borders and boundaries. So what happens in our relationships, of course, is going to affect our physical and mental well-being. What happens with our physical health is going to have a huge bearing on how we show up in our relationships. So I think we need to be having more conversations around how these realms of health integrate with each other. And I actually have an entire masterclass about this. It's called Women's Health Reimagined. And you can always register for that. It's free. It's an hour-long video. And you can register by going to graceandgrit.com/reimagine. Once again, that's graceandgrit.com/reimagine. The truth is, life is relationship. We have a relationship with ourselves. We have a relationship with our environment, with food, with movement, with restoration. And of course, we have relationships with other people. People from the past, people in our present. And I emphasize that because even though you may not see somebody for years, if you think about that person in any way, if you allow the influence of that person to impact your life in any way, you're still in relationship with that person, whether they are dead or alive. Now, I think what's really important to remember is that we learn about ourselves through relationships. Relationships afford us this incredible opportunity to get to know ourselves better. And when we know ourselves better, we can lead ourselves better. I have long said that health, in my opinion, is an exercise in self-leadership. And you cannot lead yourself well if you don't understand yourself well. Health is really a byproduct of learning how to like who you are and what you do and why you do the things that you do. And a part of that is liking how you show up in your relationships. The quality of our relationships hugely affects our chemistry and even our behavior. And you well know that chemistry and behavior deeply influence our health. So when we think about the holiday season and all of those triggers that seem to boil up around this time of year, let's just say that a certain family member is a trigger for you. When you're around that person, you have certain thoughts about the person, about how they're acting, about who they are. And if you aren't careful, those thoughts can make you feel terrible. And when we feel terrible, what do? We reach for things to make us feel better. We eat, we drink, we do all kinds maybe we just busy ourselves with trying to make other people happy because it's a distraction from that trigger. And these types of things, the eating, the drinking, the people pleasing, ultimately makes us more reactive because it's jacking up our chemistry. And the more reactive we are, the more easily we get triggered. And on the cycle goes. So I've talked a lot on this podcast over the years about the importance of nurturing your relationship with yourself and with your environment, specifically food, exercise, the things that help to balance your chemistry. So in this episode today, I really want to separate out our relationships with other people. And what can we do to manage ourselves in a way that allows us to enjoy the holiday season or any season, regardless of what other people are doing or saying or how they are acting. So I thought a really great gateway for this would be to share some truths about relationships with other people that I often find myself relaying to my students and my clients. And there's a lot baked into this. This is a very meaty conversation. So we're just opening it up. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. And there are deeper conversations to be had here. But my hope is that by reminding you of these relationship truths, you will be able to travel through this season and all of future seasons with more grace and ease. So truth number one, the only thing you can ever control in a relationship is how you show up in the relationship. Let me repeat that. The only thing you can ever control in a relationship is how you choose to show up in the relationship. Unfortunately, I know we wish this wasn't true, but you cannot make other people happy. I know some of you listening to that are like, what? I've spent my whole life trying to make other people happy. How could that possibly be true? But think about it. Think about what relationships are. Relationships are really the thoughts we have about other people and the thoughts that they have about us. And ladies, how many times have you bent over backwards in an attempt to make somebody happy, but they weren't happy? I have hundreds of examples that I could give. But of course, what comes fresh into my mind is a lot of the things that I do for my son. We've taken trips and we've done all kinds of really what I thought were lovely things that should make him happy. But they didn't make him happy because he was having an off day or he was focusing on something other than what we were doing. He was focusing on a problem or he wasn't feeling well. There's all kinds of reasons he was not happy doing something that I specifically did to make him happy. You don't get to decide how people respond to the things that you do for them. But man, do we spend a lot of time trying. And then we put all of this effort in. And if people don't respond the way we expect them to, it destroys us, right? We get really sad and depressed and frustrated, maybe even angry. And then that peppers our entire experience with the person. So I want to invite you today to do things for other people because it is how you choose to express love to that person, not because you are expecting them to respond in a particular way, because those expectations are really what end up deflating us. Because how often do people really respond in the way that you expect them to? Another kind of hard truth that is underneath this truth that I think is just important to highlight is you don't get to decide if people like you or not. You do not have that kind of power or that kind of control. Nobody in the history of humanity has ever been liked by every single person on the planet. Just doesn't work that way. So you could spend your whole life, you could spend your precious holiday season caught up in people pleasing and trying to get people to like you and trying to make other people happy. And ultimately, when they don't respond the way you expect them to, make that mean that there's something wrong. And that's just tragic because you're just going to feel terrible. So I want to give you a question to ask yourself in terms of relationships that I have found in my own life to be immensely powerful. How do I want to be showing up here? Regardless of what I get in return, regardless of how they respond, regardless of what I may or may not get, how do I want to show up in this relationship today? Truth number 2, a relationship is simply the thoughts that you have about something or someone. I say something because, again, going back to the food and the environment and those things, those are the some things. But in the context of our relationship with other people, a relationship is simply the thoughts you have about other people and the thoughts that they have about you. And of course, you cannot control the thoughts they have about you. You could be the best peach in the world, and there's somebody out there who doesn't like peaches, right? You don't get to decide or control how other people think about you. And the important thing to remember about thoughts is that our thinking is what drives our behavior. So if you want to like how you show up in relationships, you need to like the thinking that drives your relationships. And people, inevitably, people you love deeply, will say terrible things. They will act in horrible ways because they're human. And you will have thoughts, you will have the opportunity to choose thoughts about what that means. And what you make that behavior or those words mean is a really big deal because it will drive your behavior in response. So my brother is someone who triggers me a lot. I love him deeply. I consider us to have a wonderful relationship. And yet, he often says things that will make my blood boil. And before I really understood these things about relationships, my blood would boil. I would overheat. I would react, usually with anger. And it would ruin whatever event was at hand, which was usually in the company of my parents. And this cycle, because I was so unaware of it, ruined so many things, right? So many events, so many special occasions. Where now my brother can say something or behave in a certain way, and I choose not to make it mean something that is painful. I choose not to make it mean something. This is, a lot of people will sort of, their mind will be blown when I say this, and you may not agree with me, but I believe that no one can really make you feel anything. Now, as a child, that may be different because we don't necessarily have this cognitive awareness of choosing thoughts. But the beauty of adulthood is that we do start to recognize that we have a choice in how we think. And our feelings are a byproduct of how we interpret other people's behaviors. So when my brother says something that I really don't agree with, in fact, it really goes against the grain of what I believe, I can interpret that in a way that he has a different understanding of the world. And I want to know why he believes what he believes. Not to necessarily prove him wrong, but to understand who he is as a person and why he thinks the way he does. So I always encourage my clients when they are trying to improve their health to get very curious about why they behave the way they do rather than judgmental. Because when we're in a space of judgment, we can't really be problem solvers. We aren't getting inquisitive. We aren't really deepening the relationship with ourselves. In fact, I would argue we're doing the opposite. We're repelling ourselves from ourselves. And we do this in relationships with other people. When someone says something we don't agree with, we often get very reactive. We feel the need to prove them wrong. We get very judgmental. And relationships will never flourish in a space of judgment. Relationships flourish in a space of curiosity. So it is an option not to make other people's behavior about you. So another question I want to give you to ask yourself as you travel forward: how can I think about this person in a way that allows me to show up the way I want to be showing up? So remember, the first question I gave you was, how do I want to show up in this relationship? And when you get clear on that, it's much easier to answer the second question: how can I think about this person in a way that allows me to show up the way I want to be showing up? Well, in my relationship with my brother, I want to show up with love. I want to show up with curiosity. I want to show up as a friend because that's the relationship I want with my brother. And so I go into the holidays reminding myself of how lucky I am to have a brother and highlighting all the incredible things about him as a human. Doesn't mean I have to agree with all things that he does or says, but I genuinely love him as a human. I also know that he is human and he is not living a perfect life. And that allows me to give him the freedom of being human, because Lord knows I'm human too. and I'm sure I know 150% that I trigger him in a lot of ways. But a lot of the things that trigger him, they're not about him. They're about my own insecurities and my own strong beliefs and my own experience of the world. It's not about him. All right, truth number 3. Expectations can make relationships very difficult. And I realize, because I rumble with this all the time, it's very hard to be in relationships without expectations. In fact, I think I lived almost 40 years of my life kind of thinking that was the purpose of relationships. I have expectations of you, you have expectations of me. And if we can meet each other's expectations, it's a healthy relationship, which is an option. But in truth, it's no one's job to take care of your needs as an adult, right? It's no one's job. It is your job to feed and clothe and bathe and do all the things that need to be done to be a functioning and thriving human. And there is immense power in dropping our expectations of others and just choosing to love them because we choose to love them, right? This is the notion of unconditional love. I often ask my clients, I ask myself too often, what is the purpose of a relationship? Like, what do you want out of a relationship? And often when we think of the people closest to us, I will hear the answer of unconditional love. I just want to be loved unconditionally. But in order to be loved unconditionally, we also need to learn how to love unconditionally. Now, when I think of unconditional love, two things come into my mind: my dog and my son. I can't think of anything that either of them would ever do that would make me stop loving them. But then I think about a lot of other people in my life, and holy cow, do I have a lot of conditions. And those expectations, those conditions to earn my love actually cost me a lot in the relationship. So just for a minute, I want you to think of how expectations make you feel. When somebody loves you only conditionally, because they have a bunch of rules and regulations for how you're supposed to act in the world in order to earn their love, how does that really make you feel? It makes me feel imprisoned. It makes me feel suffocated. It makes me feel like I can't really express who I am because I'm so concerned if this person will actually like my truth. So the kind of relationships that I personally want to cultivate, and I hear this a lot from my own clients, is authentic ones. Loving each other for who you really are. But if we're so caught up in all these expectations of each other, nobody's really going to express who they really are. So we don't even have the opportunity to really get to know somebody when they aren't being who they truly are. So another powerful question I want to give you is, what expectations do I have of this person to earn my love or to be worthy of my love? Get a piece of paper, and somebody who you really are maybe having a difficult relationship with right now, somebody close to you, answer that question. And I bet you have a lot of expectations for how they are supposed to behave. Now, I'm not saying you can't keep those expectations. Of course you can. But is it allowing them to show up as who they really are? Is it allowing you to discover who they really are? Do you want to love this person with conditions or without? And this is always a sort of a hot topic when I bring this up, because a lot of people will say, well, Courtney, people can't just treat me however they want to treat me. Well, sure they can, but you don't have to allow it. And this is where boundaries come in. So truth number 4 is boundaries are a vital nutrient for any relationship. Let's get clear on what a boundary is. A boundary is something that you create out of the love and respect you have for yourself and the love and respect you have for your relationships. Now, a lot of people that I work with struggle to set boundaries with others. And it makes a lot of sense because a lot of people I work with also have low self-esteem or a low sense of self-worth. And if we don't love and respect ourselves, let's just say respect, because I think for some people, loving ourselves can just feel so foreign and it feels overwhelming to a lot of people. But respect is often an easier entry point. When you respect yourself as a human, it gets a lot easier to set boundaries. Because boundaries are you communicating what you will and won't tolerate in a relationship. It allows you to help somebody understand how to be in relationship with you. So again, what will you tolerate? What will you not? For example, if you're having a conversation with somebody about something difficult and they start to scream at you, a boundary would be something along the lines of, if you can't talk to me in a less of an angry tone, right? If you can't talk to me without yelling at me, I'm going to leave until you're able to have a conversation in a respectful way. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to fight back. You're simply letting this person know, out of respect for myself, out of respect for this relationship, this is what I need right now. Healthy boundaries promote self-responsibility and empowerment and actually lead us into deeper relationships with others, because people get to know us and our parameters. Weak boundaries, or having no boundaries, ultimately for us creates a lot of reactivity, because we allow people to walk over us and we allow people to treat us however they want to treat us. And then there starts to become a lot of resentment and anger and frustration in the relationship. And I realize that setting boundaries can sometimes be difficult conversations, right? You're telling somebody what you need in the relationship. Now, they don't have to honor the need. That's up to them. You can't control that. What you can control is expressing what you need and provide them with the opportunity to show up in that way. And if it is a respectful relationship, they often will show up in that way, not because you manipulated them, not because you controlled them, but because you asked for what you needed. And you were also very clear that if we can't have this respectful conversation without screaming at each other, I respect myself enough to leave until we can get into that space. Right? There's a difference between leaving out of anger and leaving out of respect. And leaving might look like a 5-minute walk around the block. Leaving, I'm not saying leaving a marriage it could be that grandiose, I guess, but I'm really talking about creating a pause in the conversation to give you both an opportunity to make sure you're coming from a respectful place. All right, truth number 5, and this is the last one I'm going to end with today, is love is always a healthy choice. So what I love to ask myself often, especially in my most difficult relationships, within the most difficult moments of my relationships, what would love do here? Love, we often confuse with agreeing with someone's opinion or allowing an unhealthy behavior. And that's not at all what I'm suggesting here. You can choose to love someone and set a very firm boundary. You can choose to love someone and walk away. Choosing love is a very kind thing to do for yourself and for your health. I know that I've been in spaces in my life where I thought, if I show up in a loving way here, they're going to think that I agree with them, or they're going to think that their behavior is okay. Because I didn't understand that it was possible to love someone and protect myself in whatever way I needed to do that. So love is always a choice. And again, it goes back to that notion of unconditional love. And love, if you think about like a moment or a person or something that just generates a lot of love within you because of the way you think about it. Maybe it's being with your dog. Maybe it's doing a certain activity. Maybe it's being with your spouse or your partner. But think of a moment where you really felt love. Think about what it does in your body. How does it feel physically? For me, my breath slows down and my body feels really expansive. And my heart feels really expansive. Everything feels possible. Everything feels good and right in the world. Why wouldn't I want to feel more of that? And love is always a choice because it's driven by how I choose to think about things. So whatever is coming down the pipeline for you this holiday season, I just want to remind you that love is always a really healthy choice for you. It doesn't mean you can't set boundaries. It doesn't mean that you stay in disrespectful situations. You can do both. So it's my high hope that reviewing these truths will allow you to travel through the holidays, heck, through life with a lot more grace and ease. And I just want to remind you of these questions that I encourage you to ask yourself throughout this episode today. How do I want to show up in this relationship? What do I want to make other people's behavior mean? What am I willing to tolerate? What am I not willing to tolerate in relationships? What would love do here? All right, my friends, that's it. I hope it helps. I hope it gives you something to work with. I wish you a wonderful week, and I will see you again next week. I have my dear friend Irene Lyon coming on the show. She's actually been on several times before. If you don't know who Irene Lyon is, she is a nervous system expert, talking a lot about trauma and how to heal the nervous system. So if you are someone who is interested in that conversation, which honestly, I think all humans would benefit from listening to this conversation, that will drop next week. So I hope you'll check it out. All right, my friends, take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.